Assalamu alaikum and welcome to Medicour on IQRA TV. I'm your host for today, Rabina Mir. Today's our live show. I hope you've been getting ready for our live show on diabetes. That's the topic we've got. In the hot seat again, our diabetes expert is Dr. Liz Martin. Hello, Liz.
Good evening.
Nice to see you here again and thank you for coming.
Pleasure.
So we're hoping we're going to get some calls today regarding diabetes, and whilst we're waiting for calls to come through, perhaps I can ask you to run us through again what we know about diabetes. So remind our viewers what diabetes is, please.
Certainly. Diabetes is a problem when we have too much sugar in our blood. There are two types of diabetes, and I think we need to just differentiate those, and then we can perhaps explain why people have diabetes. We have type 1 diabetes and we have type 2.
Okay.
Type 1 diabetes normally starts when people are young. We're thinking about children, teenagers, young adults. And the problem is that the pancreas gland, which makes insulin, isn't working properly.
So we need to know what the insulin does now, don't we?
Right.
Yeah.
So insulin is the special chemical in our blood which controls the amount of sugar that stays in the bloodstream.
Okay.
So if we don't have enough insulin, the blood sugar level will go up and up and up, and that is very dangerous if it gets too high. So we need enough insulin to control the level of glucose or sugar. Glucose and sugar is really the same thing.
Okay.
So in type 1 diabetes, people will always need to have insulin treatment because without it, their body cannot make any insulin, and that would be very dangerous.
So when you said that having too much sugar is dangerous, what's that sugar doing to the body?
The sugar in the body is basically damaging our blood vessels.
Right.
So if we think of it very simply as too much sugar will damage our blood vessels, a bit like if we live in an area where the water is very hard, we start getting coating in our pipework and we damage the pipework. And also if we're getting too much insulin in our, too much sugar in our bloodstream, we're not getting it to the parts of our body that actually need it.
Okay.
So remember we said we've got type 1, which is where our body can't make any insulin. And then we've got type 2 diabetes, which is probably, of everybody who's got diabetes, that's probably about 90% of people. And that's a very different problem. That's really for two reasons. One of those reasons is as we get older, our pancreas glands can't make as much insulin as we really need to balance.
Factory that's not working
properly. That's right. The factory is on a go slow.
Yeah.
It's not making enough. It's making some, but it just cannot keep up with when we eat our meals.
Okay.
Or if we have something, a piece of cake and a cup of tea.
Yeah.
It just can't cope with that burst of sugar that comes into our systems.
And of course we need it to cope in order to stop too much sugar damaging our...
Exactly.
What we're damaging?
Well, our blood vessels, which will go on to cause, well, we can talk about the complications a bit later, perhaps.
Okay.
But the other reason, and probably one of the main reasons we should really be talking about, is the type 2 diabetes, which happens as people become older, but very much tied in with our lifestyle, with the fact that we're overweight.
Yeah.
And the trouble is, if you have a lot of fat in your body, particularly round your middle, which is where most people get it as they become older, that fat round your middle stops the insulin which our body is making from really working. It's almost like a brick wall.
I remember you.
It's actually resistance. It's pushing the insulin away. So we're getting 20 miles per gallon. We're not getting 50 miles per gallon.
Okay.
And because of that, the blood sugar levels will go up.
So why do we get diabetes?
Well, one reason, I'm going to concentrate on the type 2s here to answer that question is, first of all, it's as people get a lot older, their bodies can't make enough insulin. Rabina, I might have a few grey hairs and a few wrinkles, and that's on the outside.
You're
So
too
just
beautiful, is
imagine
it?
what's going on in the inside. Everything's getting a bit older.
Okay.
So my pancreas gland won't be able to make enough insulin.
So this is the wear and tear
The
stuff?
wear and tear.
Okay.
But for most people with diabetes, it's very much to do with the fact they are eating too much, they are putting weight on, they're not doing enough exercise to burn up those calories,
Yeah.
and they're not attempting in a good way to lose weight, which we all know is very difficult.
It is, yeah.
But it's the difference for a lot of people between having a good control of their diabetes and not having a good control. So I suppose if we want to have a message, I know that you really like messages for
I
people,
do.
don't you?
I like the tips that we can
Well,
give people.
okay, so let's have a tip, and it's going to be eat less and walk more. So that would be a very helpful tip, but not always an easy one.
No, it's not easy, and you and me have had conversations like this before about how that support is important, how we need the family to be on board with it
Yeah.
to make it easy for the people that are dealing with diabetes. A lot of the time it's so hard because of the way we socialise and show
think-
love to one
I
another.
think you're absolutely right there. I think for a lot of us, if we're celebrating, when we're happy, when it's a birthday, when it's a special event, what do? Let's go out for a gorgeous meal. Come round and I'll cook you a lovely meal. Here's your birthday cake. Here's your wedding cake. And
Let's celebrate the new baby
likewise-
with sweetmeats and things like that.
And likewise, if we're sad or miserable, we want something to make ourselves feel better. And for a lot of us, that means we go and I'll have a little treat that might make me feel better. And little treats are rarely carrots or cauliflowers. They're usually chocolates or something in that sort of thing.
And I think if somebody says to you, you need to stop something, I don't know what happens, but there's like this button goes
Yeah,
off that says,
yeah.
that's the thing I want
Yeah.
the most.
Well, I think that if we're going to be talking about food and what people should be eating, because that's so relevant to people with diabetes, what we're really going to say is there is no food that you cannot eat. The answer is you can eat everything, but there are certain foods which should be eaten in sensible amounts. So yes, you can have chocolate. Yes, you can have biscuits. Yes, you can have bread, rice, chapatis, but have a sensible amount. Now, you looked a bit surprised there, Rabina, because you're thinking she mentioned bread and chapatis. Well, that's not sugar. But what a lot of us don't know is that certain foods, the carbohydrates, when our body digests them, will actually turn into sugar. So I'm talking about bread, biscuits, sweet biscuits and savoury biscuits,
Yeah.
rice, potatoes, so that would be crisps, chips, chapatis, because they've got flour in, a bit like bread. When we eat them, even though we might think there's no sugar anywhere near them, our bodies digest them and they actually release sugar once they're in our tummies and we've broken them down. So those foods will actually cause just as much of an increase in our blood sugar levels as if we'd eaten a chocolate bar or a piece of cake. And that's the surprise for a lot of people. So I meet a lot of people who say, I never put sugar in my tea.
Yes.
I never put sugar on my breakfast cereal. But they will be eating things, they'll be having a slice of toast, which again, when they eat that, will be converted into sugar. Now, I'm not saying you can't have bread or a chapati or rice, but think about a sensible portion. And I think often it is thinking about portion size rather than not having it at all.
Okay, one of the things that you're making me think about is that this is the things we know we're putting into our body that's full of sugar, but what about those hidden sugars? I guess this is a reminder for us to how we have to educate ourselves on what actually we're buying and what those lists of ingredients actually mean. And there are lots of things that come under the names that we may not read as sugar, but they are sugars. I'm thinking of things like fructose and then there's hidden sugars in things like tomato ketchup and drinks, aren't there?
Well, certainly drinks will often have glucose there. And I mean, it's being a bit of a, I'm almost contradicting myself here, but I would say that if there is a no sugar option with a drink, you should always go for that. So any of the sugary drinks, if there's a sugar-free, you should definitely go for that. So thinking about lemonades and ginger beers and all those, go for the no sugar option.
Okay. I just want to remind our viewers that we're on a live show, so if you'd like to ring in and ask Liz anything, please do. The number should be at the bottom of your screen, and we look forward to hearing from some of you tonight. Okay, Liz, what about the pre-diabetics? What's that all about?
Right, we can do some blood tests that will tell us when people are in danger. Perhaps that's a bit of a frightening word, perhaps I shouldn't say that, but it's very, very likely they are going to become diabetic people if things continue.
Sure.
And we know there is a window of opportunity such that if we can advise them all the things you and I have been talking about, thinking about the food you eat, thinking particularly for a lot of people about losing weight, thinking about your choice of what you eat, and also thinking about exercise. We haven't really said much about exercise, Rabina. We've talked about eating. But if you do exercise, and I suppose I should say, as soon as you say exercise, people think you should join a gym and you have to go run a marathon. Well, I just want some physical activity, which could be digging your garden, taking your dog for a walk. Instead of going all the way to work on the bus, getting off a bus stop earlier and walking. You go shopping, instead of using the lift to go to the top floor, walk up the stairs. So getting some physical activity.
And it is about the burning of energy, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I guess if for any of us that are struggling with chronic health conditions or mobility issues, it still doesn't take away the opportunity to start small and build up, because even people that are in wheelchairs can do chair-based exercises, can't they?
I mean, I know in one of the homes, which is quite close to where I live, they have chair aerobics, and I know that everybody looks forward to it. There's some music. I mean, how much exercise can you do swinging your arms around? You know, you can really do an
actually,
awful...
the benefit of exercise is actually building the stamina up to be able to do it longer and for more intense workouts, isn't it? And not everybody's going to fit that category. But I know I've had a conversation with a doctor in the past, and we were talking to somebody, and she was talking about, you know, she gets breathless. So the conversation was, well, can you get out of your door and go to the lamppost that's just outside your door? And that was the first stage of her building her stamina. And then, you know, do that for a week, and then the second week, or after you get comfortable without getting breathless, then go to another point in the road. And it was about building up the exercise gradually, not thinking that you've got to go from A to Z straight away.
I think you're absolutely right. It's far better if you do it slowly and gradually, because you're far more likely to stick at it. And for some people, the start, Rabina, could be something as simple as, you've got a telly at home. Do you control it by clicking a button?
I do.
Could you, instead of clicking a button, get off your bottom, get off your chair, walk over to your telly and turn it on, and then walk back? And if you do that twice a day, switching it on and switching it off, you've actually had a bit more activity than you would have done. But what's interesting, you were saying about how exercise, do it gradually and build up and get your stamina. What we know is that if you exercise, there are chemicals inside your brain which are sort of joyful chemicals, and you liberate joyful chemicals when you exercise. They're actually called endorphins.
Okay.
So if you exercise, you start to liberate these chemicals, and they make you feel better. Why do you think some people find great joy in running a marathon? Why do people, you know, rugby players, football players love their exercise? A lot of that are these chemicals. So think about, you know, you're going to feel better, you're going to want to do it more. So build up gradually, feel better as it goes, and any sort of physical activity is worth having.
So just coming back to people that struggle with mobility, or they've got pains and aches on top of their diabetes, weight often we know leads to other complications with health. So let's say that we've got my auntie sat at home who's, you know, put on a lot of weight, she's struggling to move about, she's getting breathless, but she wants to get into that place. How does she get the help? Who's she going to ask to help her?
Well, first of all, frankly, I think she needs to help herself. And it's as simple as that. It is. You mentioned about the lady who got out of her chair and walked from the bottom of her garden to the nearest lamppost.
Yeah.
That lady had to get out of her chair and walk to the door. And that's the start. So I hope that your auntie, your person you mentioned, has got friends. But frankly, she has to do it for herself. And that can be literally 2 or 3 steps, and the next day it's a little bit more. So yes, there are all sorts of clubs you can join. You can go to the gym. You can select your sport. If you go to a gym, you may go swimming. There's all sorts of ladies' swimming lessons. There's all sorts out there.
You could even when you're watching telly, you could get a tin of beans in one hand and a tin of beans in the other, and just be doing some movement with your arms, couldn't you? Start yourself off.
Have you cleaned your kitchen floor recently? Did you get your...
Well, I don't want to really go into that.
Well, but I mean, this is all activity.
Yes, it is.
You know, some of us
have
a toilet downstairs and we have a toilet upstairs. Why don't we say, right, I'm going to use the toilet upstairs. Therefore, we're going to go up the stairs and down the stairs, probably twice a day, and that would be exercise you wouldn't have otherwise had. But as you say, even if you have somebody who sadly is in a wheelchair, there's an awful lot you can do for exercises.
So it's really about us taking that responsibility to say,
you know,
let's do what I can.
Just made me think, YouTube, something that a lot of young people use a lot, and no doubt other members of the family can help. I bet you could even put into your phone YouTube chair aerobics, exercises to do from a chair. I mean, nowadays we have to start thinking more and more about technology and how it's helping us.
Yeah, and as you say, there are members of the family, even if you're not good with a computer, somebody in the family might be able to help you with that. That's a good tip to give us, because there is lots of things on YouTube nowadays and other methods that we can use to just add. Because I think sometimes you can lose sight of the sort of, well, what shall I do about this? And actually you need to see somebody demonstrating something for you to think, oh, actually I can do that.
Yeah. Because most of us, we don't have the imagination that a professional would have. So somebody who's a personal trainer, who's used to doing lots of activities and exercises, who tailor-makes the activity for the person in his class or the person he's seeing on a one-to-one, you know, we might as well tune into that.
Okay, that's really helpful. One of the things that is very common with diabetes is the kind of communities that it affects, and I know a lot of our audience are from the South Asian community. So why is it more common in South Asian families?
Well, you're absolutely right to say it's probably 6 times more common in South Asian people than it is in white Caucasians. It's probably 4 times more common in Afro-Caribbean people than white Caucasians. And I think that's a very difficult question to answer exactly, because there's various things going on. I think there must be a genetic thing. There's also to do with diet. The sort of food that perhaps you choose may be very different from somebody who's white Caucasian in the middle of Leeds. So difference in diet.
Because I often wonder, is it to do with the fact that we've talked about lifestyles and we become more sedentary, and back home in our countries, before we had technology and all the mod cons, we were, you know, families were working in the fields, families were working, you know, they never had a vacuum, they'd brush. So that activity in itself, they'd be sweating more in hotter countries, they'd be using more energy.
You're absolutely right, but we've still got a difference between communities. So, you know, even the white Caucasians are not doing as much physical activity. I think you're right. I think lifestyle has such a lot to do with it. And so again, the more activity we can build into our lives. You know, I want to move on, if you don't mind, because I think there must be some people out there with some questions to ask.
I hope so,
And what I wanted to just perhaps raise this issue is the complications that can go with diabetes. And that might be something which people might want to ask us about.
Okay, so I know we're going to come to a break fairly soon, and hopefully after the break we will have some calls that we can answer about that.
And I think perhaps if people don't want to speak, perhaps they could just leave a message, and we'll be happy to answer the questions which are just left as messages.
Don't be shy, we're friendly.
Yeah, but it is a bit nerve-wracking, I would imagine, ringing up and what have you.
Absolutely. So I guess because we're coming up to the break now, we should sort of move on to the subjects. What would you want to cover after the break in particular?
Well, I'll cover whatever anybody wants to ask, but complications include things like heart attacks, include strokes. People with diabetes are more likely to have problems with their eyes. People with diabetes are more likely to have problems with their feet.
Okay.
So I think we've sort of covered almost the whole of your body there.
So it's a good reminder for why we need to manage diabetes so well, because it actually can affect any part of our body.
Just thought there might be a lot of people who are wondering about all the different tablets and medicines they find themselves on with the diabetes.
Okay.
Perhaps we can help to explain what all these different tablets are for. Okay. Why do you need a cholesterol tablet if you've got diabetes?
Yes.
Why do you need a blood pressure tablet? Why do you have 3 different tablets for your diabetes? Why won't one tablet do it?
Yeah.
So maybe there's lots of issues there that we could perhaps help people with.
What do you think are the things that most people need the most help with and actually don't ask for?
I think it's help with how they change their lifestyle. I think it's understanding the importance of what they're eating and generally lifestyle. And actually, that's the bit that's the hardest.
It is the hardest.
I mean, you and I both know the good food to eat, but if I only ate the good stuff, I would be 2 or 3 sizes smaller.
Yeah.
I would be weighing less. So I think it's very difficult to understand everything and then to put it into practice.
Yeah, especially if you're doing it on your own as well, I think.
And I think as well, people are very often frightened to ask the medical person who's looking after them, because they think perhaps they would be considered to be a bit thick or daft if they don't know the answers. Well, I don't know how my car works. When I take it in for its 6-month service and the clever man who fixes it says it's my carburettor and my blah, blah, pump, I don't actually know what he's talking about. But I don't want to look silly, so I don't say, hang on a minute, will you say that again? And I think that often happens. People are afraid to say, please will you explain to me what you're doing? Why are you taking my blood pressure? Why are you looking at my feet? Where's this all from?
Or maybe I could ask you those questions when we come back after the break.
Happy to answer them.
Okay, and in the first part we've talked about what diabetes is, a bit about pre-diabetes, type 1, type 2. Any top tips around this, apart from you've already said about your tip being eat less and move more?
Yeah, I think that's very much for the type 2 patients. Type 1 diabetes is not something you can avoid. It happens. So it's not for 1 minute for anything to do with the fact you've eaten too much or not done something properly. And sometimes people can feel with type 1 diabetes that they're being judged because they have it, just as some people with type 2.
We're going to have to come back to this.
Nope.
Inshallah, we'll see you after the break. Assalamu alaikum.